Yeah.
But yeah, all morning lines. It was, and then inside it's not any cooler because there's everybody in there.
Yeah. I haven't gone yet. I will admit I haven't gone yet, but I've got to get it done before early voting because last time I waited, it's like 5 o'clock on voting day, and I stood in line forever. The actual voting doesn't take very long.
But it's just the lines are
It's
so
just the
long.
lines.
Is it any different, like early voting compared to like voting?
Nope. It's exactly the same.
I want the experience of like walking in and
Well, you can do that with early voting.
not like a 5 hour line. Like I'll go like today.
I would definitely go after like lunch because that's when some people try and like sneak it in. They're like, oh, I'm on my lunch break. I'm gonna go see if I can try and vote.
Yeah, and the first thing in the morning, all the older people vote. All the retirees, they'll go first thing in the morning, so you got a long line then too. Like 2 o'clock in the afternoon. It's good.
Man, I have too.
Or 10 o'clock in the morning, like mid-morning, mid-afternoon. Well, even 3, 1 or 3. Just not during the lunch hour.
Yeah. I saw people like looking at their phones, looking at their watches, and then they had to leave line.
I gotta go.
I'll have to wait till Monday.
I think the only way you'll cut the line is because there was like elderly people walking in, and they were like and then just like people asked them like, "Are you really
Yeah,
wait
just
in
go
line for an
on.
hour?" And then they were like, "Oh no," and then so they like just sat them down in the door. It's like I was like, "Oh, I think I just broke my ankle. Can I go sit?"
The last time I voted, and I felt so bad for her. It was a mom with 2 cranky kids. And we all just kind of, here, go ahead of me. Here, go ahead of me. And we moved her all the way up to the front of the line because those kids were having nothing. And they weren't being bad. It wasn't like they were bratty kids.
But kids trying to stand in line for an hour.
Yeah, and it's probably when they were used to getting fed, and they're tired, she's tired. I was like, just move on up. It'll help us all out. Okay. I guess we should actually start class. But we're talking about voting, so that's sort of historic. This is definitely a historic election. Or a different election. And in this section, we're going to talk about one that was just as controversial, actually. A couple of them. Okay. We're actually only 2 days behind in our schedule, so I'm feeling pretty good about that. We're going to start nationalism and sectionalism. We're going to have a little change. Because this is a shorter section, and I forgot how short the early Republic section was, so we had a test over this. I'm going to combine this one and the next one, which will be the Jacksonian Impulse. I'm not combining them into one lesson. I'm going to teach them as separate lessons. And the word lesson is a very loose, it's just how I'm cutting the chapters apart. But I'm going to combine 7 and 8 together before I do another test. So we may get through most of this one today. We'll just see how far we can get.
Since it's already about to be November, is it a little too early to ask about the final real quick?
Sure, ask.
Is it going to be over all the sections, or is it going to be over like?
It will be over whatever the last section is we do, which will be the Civil War.
Oh.
Yeah, I don't make a cumulative final.
Gotcha.
I'm not going to ask you to try to remember the Revolution at the end of the semester.
We're taking it in person, or we're gonna take it online?
Nope, it's going to be online. It's going to be the same I don't really have a final. It's really another test in the exact same format as what you've been doing.
Gotcha.
So
no respondents or anything? Or is there going to be respondents?
Yeah, there'll be respondents. It'll be the exact same thing you've been doing. Just, you'll probably have a shorter deadline. You'll have the day of the final. And then I will have to cut it off because I'll have to get the grades in. So you'll have to actually get it done. November 20th. So the test will open, I'll probably open it the night before, and then I'll close it that evening. If you haven't taken it by midnight on the 20th, then sorry. But that should be plenty of time. And you get some classes do make it cumulative for the entire year. And I figure, one, why change what we're doing? And two, you're overwhelmed with enough other classes that if I can help you out by just making this one the same as what you've had, then that's good. So, yeah, thank you. That is your final. That will be your final. Okay, I forgot my flash drive, so I'll have to scroll. I'm using the one that I posted last night. All right, sexualism and nationalism. The war is over. And this next section, this next time period, from the War of 1812 until about 1824, there's a lot going on, but not a lot going on. The country is growing rapidly. The economy is changing. Politically, there's a lot of things that are getting sorted out. But there's not going to be, there's a few big issue items, but it's mostly growing pains. We're growing as a country. There is a lot of very high nationalist feelings, mostly due to the war. Everybody's really on a high that we beat the British. They were the foremost nation in the world, and we whooped them twice now. There's also an abnormal post-war prosperity. Normally, in the wake of a war, you get an economic depression, but because of the way everything falls into place in 1812, that doesn't happen in the United States. Before the War of 1812 and during the War of 1812, Europe is still embroiled in the Napoleonic Wars up till almost the end. So they're fighting England's fighting two wars. Their trade, everything has been disrupted. And after the war is over, there is a huge demand for farm products in Europe. Is going to force up the price of American-grown exports and stimulate agricultural production. Because, if the world needs wheat, and we can grow wheat, let's grow more wheat. Also, that embargo that Jefferson imposed on the United States had an effect that he would not have wished. It spawned the building of factories. We weren't importing manufactured goods, so we started making them ourselves. So we start seeing a manufacturing sector. Now, there has been a growing one, but the embargo pushed it. And there is an idea going around that the nation needs a more balanced economy. It doesn't need to be just raw materials and merchants. Maybe we need a little manufacturing. We need a little merchants. We need a little agriculture. Let's try to balance it out. Food, I'm backtracking, sorry. That shortage of farm products meant a third of U.S. exports were cotton, tobacco, and rice. Agricultural exports jumped way high. And then towards the end of it, you get, as England starts to recover, you get a flood of cheap English goods flooding the American markets because they're trying to recover too. And that's going to affect this economy as the manufacturers ask for protection from imports. So President Madison's first message to Congress after the war was a very federalist address for a Republican. And he asked Congress to improve fortifications. He wanted a permanent Army and Navy. He asked for a new national bank. He asked for protection of new industries from foreign competition. He wanted an infrastructure/transportation system, canals, roads, and later railroads, for military and commercial use. And he even asked for a new national university. As one Federalist put it, the Republicans have out-federalized federalism. These are all very Federalist ideas. He did immediately get a standing army of 10,000 men and a strengthening of the Navy. He is also going to get a second national bank. Protective tariffs are going to be passed, and internal improvements are going to be started. But these are not non-controversial. These are very controversial, and these are the three main issues that are pushing the economy. So let's talk about them in a little more detail. The Bank of the U.S., also called BUS. It was pretty obvious pretty quickly when the first bank charter expired in 1811 that they'd made a mistake. They should have continued it. Without a national bank, state chartered banks had blossomed. They were loosely and poorly regulated. Each printed its own paper money. And in this wave of prosperity, printed money beyond what they could back with hard coin. Now, hard coin has always been an issue in the it was an issue in the colonies, and it's an issue in the States. Paying foreign debt usually requires, actual gold or silver. Most of the money was used for that, but banks were supposed to hold a reserve for all of the money that they had issued. And it sets up this boom-bust cycle when you don't do that. And people were getting loans. They were buying more land. They were building factories. And these poorly regulated state banks were part of the problem. And again, you have each bank issuing its own money, so you don't have a national currency. You have state currency, or even sometimes even more localized than that. The lack of a national bank had been an embarrassment during the war. There was no way to move internal funds. There was no way to pay debts without having to literally go get the money from one bank and take it to another. So in 1816, Congress adopted a provision for a new Bank of the United States. It was going to be located in Philadelphia rather than Boston. And even that caused some controversy. There was a bitter debate, but almost everybody realizes we got to have something. The Republicans have gone to that side, except for perhaps the old Republicans, but most had. And this issue introduces some of the leading spokesmen, characters, whatever you want to call them, of the time. John Calhoun was a legislator from South Carolina. At this point, he is a war hawk nationalist, go United States, everything for the country. And he introduces and pushes the bill through on grounds, on the constitutional grounds, that Congress could regulate currency. Henry Clay of Kentucky, another legislator who had long expressed, had long opposed a national bank, reverses himself because we need one. We showed that during the war. Daniel Webster, who is actually a Federalist and who you think would be in favor of the bank, opposes it because he doesn't want it moved from Boston. You're going to hear these names again and again and again between this time period and the Civil War. These three and a few others are going to become the leading politicians and the leading spokesmen. And they're going to flip-flop many times on their position, depending on the circumstance. But we get a bank, it moves to Philadelphia. So for the next 20 years, there's a bank. The tariff. The tariff is another issue that causes intense debate. Pretty much anything that deals with money is going to cause debate. It was in the interest of the young manufacturing sector to have a tariff. And this is bolstered by a nationalist, patriotic desire for economic independence from Britain. You know, we have our legal independence from Britain, but we are still pretty tied to them economically. And like the bank, and I didn't stress this, but the bank comes down to some sectional differences. Calhoun and Clay are both from the South. You might make a stretch that says Clay's from the West, being Kentucky, but mostly they're from the South. The opposition is from the New England, the North. The tariff is going to come down to sectional differences too. New England shippers and Southern farmers oppose the tariff. Tariff drives up the price on goods. The Southern farmers don't want to have to pay more for their teacups than they think they should, you know, just to pay a tariff. You know, if I can buy an English teacup cheaper than I can buy an American-made teacup, why should I have to buy an American-made teacup just because it's made in America? They haven't figured out how to make it cheaply enough, then that's their problem. No. Nationalists say that's not their problem. That's everyone's problem, and we should help them out. So the South is opposed. New England shippers are opposed because they're the ones who are actually paying the tariff. They're the ones bringing the goods in and having to pay the taxes on them. You pay the taxes, you lose more money. the manufacturing sector, the West, some southern farmers who are raising certain things are in favor of it. And there are minorities in each region too that either oppose or favor the tariff in difference to what the rest of their area does. But a tariff is passed. It's passed in 1816. It is a protective tariff, not a revenue tariff, even though it will raise some money. It's not made high enough to really be a money stream. And as an example of one of those minorities who later is going to switch sides, John Calhoun favors the tariff. He's a Southerner, but he had hopes that the South would get into manufacturing, and he wanted the tariff to protect those young manufacturing plants. In 1810, there were just as many wool processing plants, making clothing or making material, cotton and wool both, in the South as there were in the North. And for a brief moment in our history, it looks like the South could have become a manufacturing center. And that is what Calhoun is trying to push here. Doesn't happen, but it could happen. So we get a tariff. I don't know why I can't say that word. Internal improvements. Now this is one of those sticky areas. We've been messing with this idea of internal improvements since Jefferson came into office. Really even earlier. But Jefferson was one of the big issue people with it. The war had highlighted the shortcomings. Moving the troops through the West was difficult. There's not a lot of roads. And if you were a farmer, the only way you were going to get your stuff to market is if you lived by or close to a navigable river. If you live in the backwoods in the middle of nowhere and there's no navigable river, you have to haul it over land, which is expensive and difficult. The problem is there's nothing in the Constitution that says the United States government can invest in internal improvements. So Jefferson and then Madison after him both use national defense and the postal system as their excuse for getting into internal improvements. And the first big one is the national road. And it's supposed to be just that. In 1803, Ohio becomes a state, and 5% of the land proceeds from the sale of land in that territory had been earmarked to build a national road, that should be road, not rod, from the Atlantic to the Ohio and beyond. It starts in Cumberland, Maryland. They actually begin construction in 1815. So Maryland is up here. Cumberland is somewhere right in here. I'm not positive. And you're going to go all the way over to the Ohio. The first stretch goes from Cumberland, Maryland to Wheeling, Virginia. Wheeling, Virginia is now Wheeling, West Virginia. We'll talk about how West Virginia becomes a state later. That doesn't happen until the Civil War. And then on, and it's supposed to go onward. By 1838, it's all the way to Vidalia, Illinois. And you now have a road. Now, this is In our part of the world, we would say it's Caliche Road, but it is a drivable road. Yes, it's going to bog down when it gets wet. It wasn't exactly asphalt, but it's also not a widened cattle trail either. So you've got this road. In 1817, John Calhoun tries to get a bill through Congress for more improvements in the West. You're going to see the sectional differences pop up again. It's supported by the West and the South thinking, hey, if we build better roads into the West, they're farmers, we're farmers, we can trade better. It's opposed by New England, because why do we want to build roads for those people when you're not building roads for us? There's no immediate benefit to us, so we're not going to support it. It looks like it's going to go pretty good until the very last minute, and Madison vetoes it on the grounds that there's no constitutional basis for the government to get involved in internal improvements. And really, there's not going to be anything done again for 100 years. Not until the Federal Highway Act is passed in 1960. There are going to be a lot of internal improvements. There's going to be railroads, canals, more roads, but they're going to be built by a combination of state and private investment. But you can see this pattern of nationalism versus sectionalism, where some people are trying to do things for the good of everybody, but they're having to fight these sectional differences. And it comes down to the North, the South, and the West. And you'll get weird coalitions between two of the three to support one thing, and then it's going to change for the support of something else. But you don't have an overarching nationalism that everybody is going to jump on board. And that's human nature. It's great. We won the war. Everybody can get on board with that. But I have a factory. I want to sell my teacups. The English can undercut me by 2 cents a cup. I want a tariff that makes them have to pay 3 cents a cup to get it into the United States. That's in my best interest. But it's not the best interest of that Southern plantation owner's wife who wants new teacups and would like to pay 3 cents less a teacup for her cups. And when it comes down to money, people will argue. People will go for their own self-interest most of the time. So all of this together comes into what Henry Clay described the American system. Now, Henry Clay is a nationalist, and he describes this new system as America's capitalism maturing, and that to support this American system, which supports everybody, everybody's got to give a little bit. Government has to take an active role in protecting new businesses and encouraging enterprise. The market revolution, that's the tariff, the bank, and the higher land prices. So the market revolution is going to be supported by what causes rapid development of the Western states and territories. All of this is part of this economic plan that Henry Clay is pushing that is already happening by default. But he's trying to codify it, and get government to jump on board with being more proactive in it. Western states, and by developing Western states and territories, you're going to get more production because you're opening up more land to development. If you charge higher prices under this system that Clay pushes, if you charge higher prices for land, then the states will actually make a profit. What the government makes on a profit, they can funnel to the states for internal improvements. Since there's constitutional qualms over letting the government, the federal government, do it, we'll give the money to the states, and the states can do it. And then the strong national bank will regulate the money supply, which will create sustained economic growth. It sounds great, but there's opposition. The North, they don't not want the West to develop, but they also don't want their labor force fleeing to the West, where they have to pay more for labor. They also don't want to pay higher tariffs because they're shippers. Now, the ones that are manufacturing, they're okay with the higher tariffs. And the federal bank, there's just a whole group of people that don't like the federal bank. But Clay's American system is something that's going to come up again and again. It's not, well, it doesn't come up a whole lot, but it's a nationalist system that gets pushed. So Madison takes his second election with pretty much, it's a sweep. Or not Madison, Monroe. Okay, wait, sorry, I'm getting to it. You have James Madison followed by James Monroe. They're both Virginians, and I get them mixed up. So this is Monroe's first term. Sorry about that. He takes the 1816 election over Rufus King, where Rufus is still trying. And this is pretty much the last of the Federalists. Madison himself is a Virginia planter, as 3 of the 4 previous presidents have been, but with a difference. He has a much smaller plantation. He's much younger, but not that much younger. At 16, he had fought with Washington in the Revolution. He studied law under Jefferson. He was a representative in the Virginia Assembly. He had been the governor of Virginia. He'd been a representative in the Confederation Congress. He'd been a U.S. senator. He'd been a U.S. minister to Paris, London, and Madrid. Under Madison, he'd been Secretary of State and Secretary of War. He is the last of the Revolutionary period. He's going to be our last president that wears the wig and the knee breeches. He's kind of the end of an era. The country is growing, people are aging, and he was one of the youngest. But he has all of this experience, much like previous presidents. He is more of an old Republican, although he accepts the fact that we have a need to have that national bank. He's pretty much going to end economic nationalism in the country. He's not going to undo it per se, but it's not going to move on. And the one setback he does, he allows the national road to be extended, but he's going to veto a bill in 1822 which would allow for tolls to pay for repair and maintenance. So we're going to extend the road, but we're not going to keep it up. Sounds very familiar. But he does do one thing. He surrounds himself with young Republicans. John Quincy Adams becomes the Secretary of State. William Crawford becomes the Secretary of Treasury. John Calhoun is Secretary of the War Department, a position he actually offered to Henry Clay, but Henry Clay wanted to remain Speaker of the House. Speaker of the House has a lot of power, and Henry Clay liked power. And after his election, he goes on a goodwill tour of New England. And one of the newspapers there, in writing about it, calls this the era of good feeling. And it really is. The economy, there's division, there's infighting, but overall, the economy's good, we're at peace, there's no one fighting, the Indians are kind of under control. It's a pretty even, just kind of rocking along on an even keel. It's not going to last, but it's good for now. He's going to also win his election in 1820. There will be absolutely no opposition. He'll get all but 4 of the electoral votes. One person will vote for John Quincy Adams, who is his who's his Secretary of State, and then 3 are just not there. But it's just like, 1820, we'll just keep going. And the two-party system is going to end. It just kind of fades away. But it'll come back with new and different players, because we're going to have a really ugly election in 1824. So during the beginning of Monroe, I'm going to keep saying Madison, but it's Monroe. We have to deal a little bit more with Britain. We never quite get away from Britain. There's a growing trade with Great Britain and her colonies in India. But the Treaty of Ghent that ended the War of 1812 really didn't settle any of the differences. The issues that brought on the war, other than impressment and seizing ships, now that ended. But some of the other issues had not. And they need to be dealt with. So the Rush-Bagot Agreement of 1817 begins to address some of the unfinished business. It's done by a series of letters between Acting Secretary of State Richard Rush and the British Minister to the U.S., Charles Bagot. There was an issue of naval competition on the Great Lakes. They settled this by limiting the amount of U.S. ships sent into the Great Lakes to gather customs. There's no reference to the land boundary between Canada and the United States in reference to the Great Lakes. They just kind of agree, you stay on your side, we'll stay on our side, it'll be fine. And they create the tradition of an open border between the U.S. and Britain. Now, it will get more defined during the Convention of 1818. The northern limit of the Louisiana Purchase is settled at the 49th parallel from the crest of the Rockies to Minnesota. So they agree to this. we lose this little bit of the Louisiana Purchase. But we basically draw this line up to here. When you get to Oregon, the border kind of moves a little bit, it goes up. And the two men agree that Oregon will be jointly occupied by both the British and the Americans. And then the last point was that the right of American fishermen to fish off Newfoundland, as they had done since 1783, was reinstated. That's important for New England fishermen. The only issue that does not get satisfactorily solved is the issue of this growing trade with Great Britain and India. Britain is still working under a mercantile system, whereby her colonies feed the mother country. And Britain really didn't want the Americans to trade a lot with India and the West Indies, not openly. So she closed some of the ports to American shippers because under their system, under the mercantile system, and it's their country, they get to write the rules. They want the raw materials to go to England. They don't want them going to the United States. So in the United States, we passed some navigation acts. The Navigation Act of 1817 said that the importation of West Indies products had to be on American vessels or West Indian vessels. So we weren't accepting goods from West Indies that were carried on British ships. Britain really didn't care. They closed more ports. In 1818, we closed our ports to all British vessels that were coming from colonies that were closed to American shippers. Basically, if you won't play with us, we won't play with you. And this is one of those cutting off your nose to spite your face things. But and in 1820, we extended it to all of the products from the West Indies. Now, smuggling is going to continue. It's not like we cut off all goods from the West Indies, but legally we have. So we still have, we've got better relations with Britain, but not great. There's still a little bit of a snag. So that era of good feeling is not for everybody. The other boundaries we need to deal with, and I'm going to push it up like that so you can see the bottom one, was Florida. Spain is in decline. Spain has been in decline. And at this point, they're unable to uphold their part of Pinckney's Treaty from 1795. Mostly the part that keeps the Indians, that Spain was supposed to keep the Indians on their side of the line and keep them from harassing Americans. And the Indians we're talking about here are mostly the Seminoles. The Seminoles had both absorbed runaway slaves into their tribe and taken slaves. They intermarried with the African Americans, but they also held African Americans as slaves, as well as other Indian groups as slaves. And they're pretty much, they've got Florida in the bag. They can do whatever they want in Florida because Spain has no power. And they're kind of running amok. In 1816, there is a clash between Americans. I can't remember if this is in Georgia or South Carolina. Probably Georgia. And in retaliation, the Americans burn a Seminole village. But it's starting to get ugly on that southern border. So Secretary of War Calhoun calls on a general named Andrew Jackson to bring in federal troops. His orders were take care of the Indians, leave the Spanish alone. And then to make matters even more difficult, you've got the English trading with the Indians in Florida. So in 1818, Jackson enters Florida with 2,000 troops. In April, he attacks a Spanish fort at St. Mark's, burns a bunch of Seminole villages, takes captive 2 Seminole chiefs and 2 British traders and executes all 4 of them. Okay, now England's upset because 2 of her citizens have been executed. Madrid is a little concerned. And Calhoun is thinking, what the heck? That's not what I told you to do. In May, Jackson takes Pensacola, which was the capital, the Spanish capital of Florida. Pensacola is up here. It's gorgeous. I love Pensacola. It's one of my favorite places. It's up here in this area. Now, Spain's really pissed. This person just took their capital. Washington is concerned. The expansionists, people who want the country to get bigger, are thrilled. Calhoun, who's Secretary of War, and the cabinet under Monroe are thinking they need to call Jackson back, slap his hand, and tell him that censor him for not following orders. But they're not really all that unhappy with him because, hey, we might get Florida out of this. And he had told Calhoun before this all started, if you want Florida, I can get it in 60 days. And really, but at this point, because he's embarrassed everybody, the only support he has is John Quincy Adams. And Adams had been already negotiating with Spain for the purchase of Florida. And we will talk about John Quincy Adams' purchase of Florida next time, because we're out of time.
So when he killed the 2 people, was that an accident or no?
Oh, no, he executed them.
Okay.
Yeah, he meant to kill them. Jackson is one of those people in history, you either love him or hate him. He was very violent, go with that. He was very passionate. And we will get a lot more of him before this is over with. Y'all have a great day. Oh, one more thing before you leave. The online thing glitched on Wednesday. So if you were online, if you were supposed to be online, I'm counting you here because it got like the first 6 people and then the chat shut down. So if you notice that, don't worry about it. I'm going to give you credit anyway.